After Company 8's daring rescue of Captain Obi with Moonlight Mask's aid, the evangelist's plan surrounding the pillars is finally set in motion. As mysterious events unfold, both Company 1 and Company 5 find themselves drawn to the charred ruins of St. Raffles Convent through separate investigations. What dark secrets lie buried beneath the ashes of this holy place? Let's find out. Regarding St. Raffles Convent, its emblem was modeled after the Holy Soul crucifix formed from flowers. At this time, 113 sisters had joined this convent. Many orphan girls were raised in this place and eventually became nuns. They thoroughly devoted their lives to daily prayer. From their souls, they were grateful to their God. Every day, the nuns ate 3 times a day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They freely basked in the light of the sun. Their sustenance mainly came from vegetables, which were naturally tended to by the nuns themselves. Because of the convent's name and this custom, it became customary to give the nuns names derived from plants. We then see Captain Hibana, who visited there at the present time. She prayed and spoke with her former companions there. First was Sister Sakura, whom she told not to prank too much, and with Sister Clematis, not to be too picky. She entrusted everything to Sister Sumire. After that, she looked at the convent and became curious about what might be there. In front of her were the current ruins of St. Raffles Convent. She was accompanied by Kishiri, whom she told to stay put. He responded that he should be watching over her, so he couldn't leave her alone. But Hibana replied that a filthy brat like him wasn't allowed to set foot in that convent. She said she would just call him if anything happened. He protested, saying she was as cold as ever, noting that he had gone out of his way to come to this empire's backwater. Flashback to the Special Fire Force Combined 5, where Kishiri was talking to a woman, asking if she had finished her training. He added that once she reached his level, training would become a piece of cake. He suddenly invited her to dinner, mentioning that he knew the owner of a restaurant where reservations were extremely difficult to get. He asked if it would be okay to take her there. The woman was puzzled by his offer. Hibana interjected from behind, questioning what kind of man he was, trying to make himself look good. She said only morons would buy into that, and so Kishiri wondered if he had caught her interest. While walking, Hibana responded that even his hair was creepy. It was disgusting, so he should cut it. She added that ugly and desperate men were so pathetic. Kishiri hadn't expected this response. Back in the present, he mentioned that at least he no longer needed to iron his bangs every morning. He claimed this was proof that his captain cared about him. Or maybe, he suggested, she had feelings for him. Hibana was creeped out by this and asked why Company 5 was full of creeps. Kishiri stood there, hugging himself. Back to the present, Hibana walked into the burned convent and entered. When she touched the wall, she suddenly remembered something. She recalled her time there as a child. Her companions had called her then to show her a beehive. Young Hibana was curious but asked if it wasn't dangerous. One of them replied that that's exactly why they called her. Meanwhile, Iris was sitting on the side, and Hibana asked if she wanted to join them. Iris couldn't believe it, but Sakura asked if that was okay, since it'll be dangerous for Iris. Hibana pulled her along, saying not to worry because she would protect her. Young Iris was surprised by this. Hibana added that she had nothing to worry about. They searched for the beehive at the top of a tree, but it wasn't long before they were caught by Sister Sumire, who said she had heard them. She couldn't believe they were planning to approach an insect's nest. Hibana asked what the big deal was, saying they were just going to look at it. Even so, Sister Sumire said it was time for prayer. The children had no choice but to comply. However, Sakura whispered that they should come back later to look at it, which surprised Hibana. Sister Sumire responded that she could still hear them. This made all the children laugh. Back in the present, Hibana remembered the troublemaker Sakura. Even though she was called Sister, Sakura was still young back then, and Sister Sumire was too serious. She continued exploring inside the convent and thought about how now only she and Iris remained. She created a small flower-shaped flame on her finger and remembered the fire that had occurred in that place. She promised by St. John's wort that she would seek revenge. She observed her surroundings and noticed how the place was destroyed by fire. Nothing remained of the surface building. She looked around and thought that if that was the case, something must be hidden somewhere here. She continued searching and observed the ground. She was certain there was an entrance leading to the nether somewhere. She knew she would learn something about the mystery of doppelgangers here that would unravel the mystery of spontaneous human combustion. She looked at her watch and thought that if there was a cave under the foundation, she would know it from the surface due to the frequency. However, she still didn't know where. She continued walking and feeling the ground while observing her watch. Finally, she noticed the frequency dropped in that area. Without doubt, there must be a cavern underneath. She remembered that this place was where they used to eat before. She thought the entrance to the netherworld must be close by. Hibana looked for the place where the nuns never went. She suddenly noticed the altar and had no doubt that beneath it lay the mystery about the doppelgangers. Hibana observed the altar, knowing that beneath it lay the path to the nether she was searching for. However, she wasn't sure how to move such a large altar. In frustration, she kicked it and muttered "bastard." She was puzzled that it didn't even budge. She then stared at the altar, trying to remember what it was used for. Suddenly, someone behind her answered that it was for offerings, he guessed. Hibana turned around to find Kareem and Hua Yin. Kareem asked if she was really a former sister. She questioned back what they were doing there. Kareem replied that there was something he wanted to discuss with her. She couldn't believe it and was curious about why they had come all the way to the convent. Kareem got straight to the point and said they wanted to ask her about the doppelgangers. Hibana was surprised that they knew about that too. She was irritated at Kishiri for letting them enter so easily. Hibana said she suspected something was hidden underneath, but she didn't know what to do as she had reached a dead end. So Kareem said he could help with this. He asked Hibana if she could produce flames from below. When Hibana asked if that was an order, Hua Yin volunteered to do it instead. But Hibana stopped him, saying it was fine and she would do it. Hibana used her rose whip technique, where she created rose stems with thorns using flames. Kareem joined in, using his thermoacoustic refrigeration ability. He used his instrument to lower the temperature and turn it to ice. As a result, they managed to bring down the altar. They were curious if there was indeed an entrance somewhere there. And when the smoke cleared, they saw a small entrance in the floor. Kareem lifted it and peered inside. A staircase leading down to the nether was revealed. Hua Yin wondered how something like this could exist in a blessed convent. They descended the stairs, and Hibana noticed that this area hadn't been affected by the fire. Hua Yin was troubled by their entry and asked God for forgiveness. Below, they were greeted by what appeared to be a study room. Hibana wondered why such a place existed underground. Kareem said this didn't align with the church's teachings. Hua Yin agreed it seemed that way, hoping it was all just lies. Hibana counted the pillars there and noticed there were 8, the same number as the Adala burst human pillars. Kareem sensed something foul in the air. He said it smelled of smoke, and where there's smoke, there's fire. He felt they would find clues there. Even Hibana was convinced that somewhere there lay answers about the mystery of human combustion. She was frustrated because she knew someone had started the fire that occurred in that convent, and she was certain the proof she was looking for was there. She noticed an old botanical book there, but it seemed like a completely ordinary botanical volume. Hua Yin noticed an agronomy textbook there. Agronomy relates to the science and technology of producing and using plants for agriculture, food, fuel, and other purposes. When Hua Yin asked Hibana about this, she paused and thought about the connection. She remembered young Iris. She became worried and thought she might be overthinking. When looking at the book on the table, she noticed a book about bugs. Once again, concern was evident on Hibana's face because of this. Kareem noticed the display of insect specimens there. He thought the books about bugs and plants there were worthless. However, Hibana felt differently as she began to sweat, remembering a bug in a plant. Kareem couldn't believe they went to the effort to create such a room, only to fill it with reference materials about bugs and plants. Assuming they had plans to carry out experiments to turn sisters into doppelgangers, he wondered why there were no concrete details about that. He questioned what this place really was. Hibana noticed another book on the table, which Hua Yin identified as a cookbook. This made Hibana remember their meal times back then. Kareem thought it seemed like just a materials warehouse after all, but Hibana felt differently about it. She remembered the food cooked for them and what they ate, and suddenly thought of a bug. This made her feel nauseous. When Huiyin asked what was wrong, Hibana seemed to have figured something out about their entire stay there as sisters of the convent. Karim was curious if she had figured something out. Hibana couldn't believe they were being produced there like crops. She explained that the sisters were given names of flowers. Karim couldn't understand the point of this, and Huiyin wondered if this place was important after all. Hibana clarified that they were given names of flowers and bugs. Suddenly, Sister Sumire responded from behind that there would be no flowers without bugs. The three were startled by her presence there, especially Hibana, who couldn't believe she was there. Sister Sumire asked if she remembered her and her name, which in kanji meant something like charcoal servant. Hibana was confused about why she was there. From the darkness, Sister Sumire appeared and asked what their purpose was there. Hibana directly questioned if she was behind the fire and everything else. Sister Sumire couldn't believe that was the answer Hibana was looking for. When Hibana asked what she was doing there, Sister Sumire simply replied that she already had an answer. Karim and Huiyin remained quiet on the side while the two conversed. When Hibana mentioned the doppelganger, Sister Sumire responded with quite so. She remarked how enthusiastic of a student Hibana was, always double-checking answers with grown-ups, just like before. Hibana cursed in anger, telling her to stop that and reveal what she was doing there. Sister Sumire couldn't believe how demanding Hibana was for an answer. She insisted it wasn't her. Hibana was furious, accusing her of using the sisters for her doppelganger experiments. She added that Sister Sumire had deceived the children under her care to turn them into pyrokinetics. Karim was shocked to hear this. Sister Sumire responded that all the sisters were innocent and obedient. Exactly, said Hibana, and they admired her so much. Upon seeing the insect specimens on display again, Hibana lashed out, saying Sister Sumire had turned against them. She had mixed Adala bugs into their vegetables and fed them with it. Sister Sumire fell silent at this. Karim asked what she meant about feeding bugs to create pyrokinetics. Hibana explained that this was the truth behind spontaneous human combustion. The mass outbreak that occurred there was one of Sister Sumire's doppelganger experiments. She added that doppelgangers were another version of someone residing in Adala. Sister Sumire was trying to call them to this world. Karim was curious about the bugs' role in this. Hibana explained that the bugs were creatures from Adala. She theorized they served as links to their world. For every person in the world, there existed a doppelganger. Spontaneous human combustion occurred when their existence intruded and merged with their own. When asked what Adala really was, Sister Sumire replied that she expected no less from Hibana. She was impressed that Hibana had reached such a conclusion. She was truly a spectacular child who had grown even more spectacular. Suddenly, the place shook with an earthquake, which worried Huiyin. When Hibana asked about those pillars, Sister Sumire said that thanks to her experiments, all pillars had been assembled. Hibana was puzzled by this and asked if she had also been performing Adala burst experiments. But the only ones she had left alive at the convent were herself and Iris. She seemed to realize something then. Sister Sumire clarified that although she wasn't aware yet, the eighth and final pillar was the doppelganger of Amaterasu, the first pillar. Huiyin interrupted the conversation, asking what she was referring to and what she was doing there. Hibana couldn't accept that she might be talking about Iris. She demanded to know how many orphans' lives Sister Sumire had played with just for her experiments. Sister Sumire demonstrated her ability and said they should end their story there. She threatened that they would be buried alive in that place. Huiyin accepted they would fight, but not Karim. Again, Hibana asked how long she had been experimenting on them. Had it been since she raised them? She was curious if it had just been her laboratory. The underground shook again, and Huiyin grew concerned about the new earthquake. Sister Sumire quickly approached him, and when Huiyin tried to fight back, she stopped him with a thundering peak elbow. She elbowed him so hard in the chest that he fell backward. Karim prepared his instrument and ordered Hibana to attack. However, it suddenly shattered in his hands, shocking Hibana. Karim couldn't believe Sister Sumire had done this just by touching it. She reached for his chest and asked if it wasn't cold down there. Karim suddenly got a nosebleed from her move and fell to his knees. She recognized him as Karim and was impressed that he could steal heat away in an instant. She said that when Rekha was young, he was very energetic and had a strong sense of justice. He was shocked to learn she had also raised Rekha. Hibana asked what she was doing. Sister Sumire commented on how curious she always was. So, before she died, she would reward her with answers. The great cataclysm that happened 200 years ago was a failure. Neither the number nor the strength of the pillars was enough then, which was why the world was left as cinders. Since that failure, she had continued creating pillars for the next time. Hibana was shocked to hear it was 200 years ago, questioning who she really was. Hadn't spontaneous human combustion not existed before the Great Cataclysm? What then was the Great Cataclysm? If spontaneous human combustion was the awakening of an individual through merging with their doppelganger, then was the Great Cataclysm the merging of Adala and their world? Sister Sumire merely responded that wasn't it cold that day. Huayin grew concerned about another earthquake that occurred. He said the vibrations were as powerful as the attack she had used on him. He questioned what her ignition ability was. She again just said that they would be buried alive in that place. But Hibana said there was a reason why she came there. It was more important than the mysteries of that world. And that was to exact revenge on the person who stole the lives of her most beloved friends. Sister Sumire suddenly asked if she believed they had all died. Flames suddenly appeared where she stood, and Hibana was shocked by what she saw. Small demons who recognized her. Kareem couldn't believe it when he saw the demon children there. Hibana noticed the demon with freckles and suddenly remembered Sakura. Sister Sumire said they weren't far from hell. The demon children complained that it had been very painful. They kept calling Hibana's name repeatedly, and so she asked what she had done. Sister Sumire was curious if she recognized any of them. She thought that as head sister, she would reunite them at long last. Behind them, Huayin struggled to stand up to approach and target Sister Sumire. Just as he was about to reach her, part of his sleeve suddenly caught fire and got cuts. Kareem ordered him to stay back. Sister Sumire said she tended to hurt those who sneak up on her. The two finally figured out that her ability was to attack by vibrating her body. Kareem added that she attacked and defended using vibrations. But he was curious how she could create such vibrations using her ignition ability. So Sister Sumire explained that it was a common bodily function of living things, shivering, to be precise. It was simple, it was cold, so she trembled. She just amplified that trembling. Hibana explained that shivering was a bodily function where your body automatically shakes when cold. Each muscle vibrates in little bursts, creating heat. She used her ability to amplify the heat and turn it into kinetic energy, which could create larger vibrations. Kareem asked if she was causing those earthquakes. Then what kind of being was she and what was the extent of her power? Hibana added that it was impossible for her to shake the earth itself, ignition ability or not, unless she was using a Dala burst. Kareem was shocked. Suddenly, the ceiling of their location exploded, which even Sister Sumire hadn't expected. The ceiling collapsed and Kishiri peeked through, checking on Hibana. Hibana praised his good work and ordered him to help. Kishiri blushed at her words. But Sister Sumire was irritated and called them sacrilegious little children. Suddenly, the woman in black appeared behind her and asked Sister Sumire if she was still up to her old tricks. She was surprised to see her. The woman in black said she had rotted away in the Shinshin Dao forest and used the very last of her strength to see her. She replied that 200 years had passed and she was still a worrywart. She told her to stop it and that the human world was destined for destruction. The woman replied that nothing would change. She had become a pillar just like her 200 years ago, and since then, she couldn't finish what she was going to say and just vanished. Meanwhile, Hibana and the others escaped. Kishiri urged them to leave while they still had a chance, and so Kareem thanked him. Sister Sumire said they would just struggle. She bid farewell to the lady in black and said that fulfilling the duty of the seventh pillar was now in her hands. She gradually disappeared into the darkness along with the little demons, saying it was a chilly day and the flames wouldn't be enough. Kishiri and the others had escaped to the surface, and Kareem noticed that the earthquakes had stopped. Huayin remarked that it seemed they weren't being followed. Concern was evident on Kishiri's face, while Hibana remained quiet, deep in thought. She remembered the demons she saw and recognized them as Sakura and Clematis. She mentioned that spontaneous human combustion was apparently caused by doppelgangers from hell merging with humans in this world through Adala, and the Great Cataclysm was Adala itself impeding the entire world. It was spontaneous human combustion on a worldwide scale. Kishiri couldn't follow what she was saying and asked if she was talking to them. But Hibana added that if all the pillars assembled with the evangelist, there would surely be a second great cataclysm, and the world would be destroyed. Therefore, they needed to work together to prevent it from happening again. The scene shifted to Asakusa, where Arthur, while walking, thought that it should have been a fatal blow. He had just barely missed his vitals and had faced an extremely dangerous person. He was restless and kept holding something in his hand. He sat down on the side and stared into space. He remembered Dragon and mentioned that he was supposed to be a knight. Then he bowed his head in disappointment. He looked at what was hidden in his jacket pocket and took it out. He said it should have been a holy blade, but it didn't make a difference in the fight. Suddenly, Vulcan took it from his hand and inspected it. He asked if that was all that remained of Excalibur. He added that it was fire-resistant carbon that can be bought at the hardware store. Arthur lay down and replied that it was orichalcum. Vulcan was puzzled because that was a metal from fantasy books. Arthur said it was the metal of legend. A dwarven smith had forged Excalibur from orichalcum. When Vulcan asked where he found that orichalcum, he answered from the caldera of Volcano Kazan. Vulcan was curious about which Kazan he was referring to. Arthur didn't answer immediately and turned away, then said at the hardware store. Vulcan wanted to laugh at this, but held back to avoid offending Arthur. Upon closer inspection, Vulcan said it wasn't real orichalcum. Arthur told him to be quiet, asking what he knew. But again, Vulcan said it was fire-resistant carbon available at hardware stores. Arthur told him to shut up again, but Vulcan suddenly pulled him. When Arthur asked what he was doing, saying he was the Night King, so he should show respect, Vulcan addressed him as Night King and suggested they leave and search for real orichalcum. Arthur was curious about what he meant, so Vulcan clarified that they would search for the legendary metal and forge a true holy blade for him. Arthur seemed to be reinvigorated by these words. In another place in Asakusa, Yu was asking what orichalcum was, because he had never heard of it. Lisa asked if that was the legendary metal, and if something like that really existed. Vulcan answered that it didn't, and Sister Iris arrived, surprised that Yu was there, so he said that Vulcan called for him, so he came right away. Iris said she was very happy that Yu was doing well, and he replied that he was better because of Iris. After Iris left, Yu thought for a moment and asked Vulcan what they would do, and what exactly he had told Arthur to get him back on his feet. Vulcan told him to calm down and listen. He explained that the key to Arthur's strength was his self-image as a knight, and the stronger his self-image was, the stronger he became, and the key was to make Arthur think what they wanted him to think. Yu asked what that meant in other words, and Vulcan replied that in other words, they would create their own legend and pretend they had found the orichalcum. Yu asked if Vulcan's "we" meant they would be included in his pretend game, and Lisa wondered if Vulcan thought they could do it. Vulcan said it was just Arthur, so it wouldn't be difficult, but if they wanted to fool him, the more people the better. He added that the battle at Fuchu was a reminder that their enemies were complete monsters, so if they were going to fight them, Arthur absolutely needed to power up. Company 8 would be in trouble if Arthur didn't progress from where he was now. Yu agreed it was important, but he seemed to dislike the make-believe idea, so Vulcan said he knew that, and it was absolutely ridiculous. However, Vulcan said that when it came to Arthur, the absurd becomes natural, so they needed to lower their IQ for this. Lisa asked where Arthur was, and they showed that he was outside. Arthur replied that he was indeed outside, itching to begin, and he thought they couldn't make him wait any longer, and he had prepared the fake orichalcum, so they should move. However, Yu said to wait, because Vulcan had said they needed to lower their IQ, so he asked how low. Vulcan answered that it was so low he would hit the orichalcum, which made Yu and Lisa stare blankly. Yu said Vulcan thought that was a good line, and according to Lisa, Vulcan was just as much of an idiot. In the next scene, Arthur saw them coming, and Vulcan apologized for making Arthur wait, saying he had brought companions. Arthur understood this, and said things would be easier with a four-man party. According to Vulcan, they needed information about the orichalcum, and Arthur agreed, saying they needed a clue, but it was a legendary metal that no one had ever seen. Vulcan said he had heard of someone who had information about it, which surprised Arthur. Vulcan said the pickle shop owner knew something about it, which surprised Yu and Lisa, while Arthur asked why a pickle shop. Lisa called out to Vulcan, who told her not to be impatient, while Yu said Arthur was starting to doubt. Vulcan told Arthur to think about how the pickle maker would weigh down his pickle press. Of course, the answer was stones, because a pickle pro was a stone pro. Because of that, Arthur said Vulcan was a genius, and it was perfect because no one would think to look in a pickle store. He added that they should press the owner for details, and you said his expectations were already low, but Arthur was truly an idiot. In the next scene, they arrived at the store, and the owner saw them. Arthur asked the owner where he could find orichalcum, but you stopped him, while Lisa apologized, saying Arthur was talking nonsense. However, the owner said it was rumored that the orichalcum was at the kimono dealer's shop, which surprised the three. Arthur was delighted by this and asked for more information from the man, who glanced at Vulcan and just repeated what he had said. Arthur noticed this and called the man an NPC, saying it was a pity, but it seemed they wouldn't find anything else there, so they should follow the man's instructions. Vulcan said that sounded good, and according to Lisa, Vulcan was 2 steps ahead, while you asked if this wasn't unnatural for Arthur. The pickle shop owner said Company 8 was full of weirdos, like Arthur would believe that the hunk of steel he had was a metal of legend, being used as a pickling stone, so he mentioned what a farce it was. In another place, Joker was talking to Benimaru, asking if he liked high places. The captain of the 7th replied that he was just looking at what to destroy next, like an idiot, which made Joker laugh. He said he had been lost since the beginning. Even now, nothing had changed, even though he was helping the Empire's enemy, and what the 7th did in taking in the 8th was right. According to Benimaru, Asakusa hadn't changed either. He said that country was just a lie, the whole world was. He said he wanted to rip to pieces everyone better than him, those more powerful than him, because he was disgusted by them. Joker asked if that wasn't pretty violent. Benimaru replied that it was indeed violent, and he didn't know what the right thing to do was, because all he wanted was to destroy anyone who got better treatment than him, and protect anyone weaker than him. He added that a thug like him wasn't a leader, so Joker asked if everything Benimaru did was right, and anyone he beat up was bad. He didn't know about Benimaru, but to him, it was like being a king, and Benimaru said that's what Conro had told him too. He added that the 8th was preparing to fight, and he thought he had no choice but to join them. Joker replied that they weren't the only ones siding with the 8th, which surprised Benimaru, and Joker explained that he wasn't the only one from the Nether who disliked the Empire. Then, we returned to Arthur, who was asking if what he was holding was the Trowel of Destiny, and he asked if the barber knew about the orichalcum. Someone told him that what he was holding was the Scoop of Destiny, and that indeed the barber knew about the orichalcum. Arthur looked at the Scoop of Destiny and said that it seemed their next destination would be the barber, so they should start moving. Lisa asked Vulcan if he thought the stops he had made for this wild goose chase were enough, and Vulcan replied that the people of Asakusa were good at playing along, so everyone was being very cooperative. Then, Arthur asked them why they were just standing around, so he told them to move. Lisa asked if Vulcan had made sure to give this adventure an ending, and where he had hidden the orichalcum, so Vulcan told her to relax, because this story had a twist ending. In the next scene, Arthur had arrived at an Yggdrasil, the world tree, and he said it was rumored that there was a hint about the orichalcum's resting place beneath its roots. He added that people said he needed to use the Trowel of Destiny, but you said he was already holding it, and said it had appeared there spontaneously. Arthur started digging, and you asked if there was anything there, and Arthur said it was a piece of paper. He read what was on the paper, which said, "They say it's darkest beneath the lighthouse." Sometimes the answer was right under your nose. The orichalcum is at the first shop you stopped by. Because of this, Lisa said Vulcan had put in more effort than she thought, and Vulcan replied that he figured Arthur unraveling the answer by himself would give him a sense of accomplishment. Lisa realized it was at the pickle merchants, and the legend would end where it began, and while it wasn't original, Arthur seemed happy. Then, it showed that he was struck by a realization about where the orichalcum was, and his answer was that it was in the Nether, because of the line, "It's darkest beneath the lighthouse," which in other words meant it was in a dark place. You, Vulcan, and Lisa were shocked by his answer, so you told Arthur to read the note again, because the word shop was written there. However, Arthur still thought it was in the Nether, because no one had ever seen it, and you said he wasn't listening anymore. He asked Vulcan what they should do, because Arthur's delusion was getting out of hand, and according to Lisa, Vulcan had made it too difficult, and how would Arthur figure it out now, as he was telling them to journey to the Nether? Orichalcum is a legendary metal from the fabled island of Atlantis, and it was an extremely rare mineral. It is a stone, a legend of rare, surrounded by myth, and had entered the realm of the legendary. It is a perfect fit for forging the legendary sword Excalibur, and if one wanted to forge that sword, there is nothing better than orichalcum. Then, Arthur said that he had unraveled the whereabouts of Excalibur, but Lisa reminded him that what he was looking for was orichalcum, and if he was disappointed that he found orichalcum because he was looking for Excalibur, she would go crazy. According to Arthur, everything was written on the treasure map, and he read the line, "It's darkest beneath the lighthouse." And he said it was written in ancient runes, so he didn't know what it meant, but it said dark, and that was enough for him. The darkness it spoke of was the nether, and that's where Excalibur was. However, you argued again about the line, "the first shop you stopped by," asking if Arthur didn't think there was something fishy about where they first went, the pickle merchant. Arthur asked how he could remember where they first went, and he thought the paper was pointing them to the first of all lands, Atlantis. For Lisa, she doubted that's what the paper was doing, and Vulcan told you that Arthur was far gone, so they needed to change their strategy. On the other hand, Arthur said they should go to the nether. The four walked towards it, and Vulcan asked you if he was listening, because the first thing to know about idiots was that they were hasty, and they jumped to conclusions without thinking. You said it seemed that way, and Vulcan asked him if he knew the term short circuit, and he replied that maybe he did. He asked if you knew what happened when you directly connected the positive and negative terminals of a battery. You replied that it could cause a fire, and something needed to mediate between the two, and that was what a short circuit was. Vulcan explained that idiots had like a short circuit in their minds, and that things should be considered from all angles, looking at all possible options, then finding the best available one. You said he would keep that in mind. However, for Lisa, the problem with their situation was that there were too many things between Arthur and the answer, and Arthur couldn't reach that answer. Because of this, Vulcan mentioned that Arthur's voltage might be low, and you thought that honestly, Arthur might be running on a watch battery. Lisa said this was taking her back because of lessons with Vulcan and you, and according to you, Lisa used to watch the whole thing. Then, Vulcan hugged them both, saying they would fix that short circuit. Arthur asked them what they were doing, telling them to hurry up and find the entrance to the nether. Because of that, Vulcan mentioned they also needed to fix this broken situation. Soon after, they found a door leading underground, and Arthur asked if they could enter the nether from there. You asked if it would be okay for them to enter the nether without permission, and Vulcan replied that it's not like they were ideal firefighters. At that moment, a little girl asked for their help because her cat was stuck on a tree, but Arthur dismissed it, saying they were in the middle of a quest, which shocked his companions. Arthur added that they couldn't turn back now, but according to Vulcan, they still could. After entering the nether, you said they had told Arthur they could still turn back, but he wasn't listening, so he was like a broken record telling Arthur to listen. According to Lisa, she thought you was scared of the nether, and he snapped, and for Vulcan, this was you's first time. Then, Arthur hit you on the head, telling him to get it together, so you asked what he had done, and Arthur replied that they were in the nether, and if he went crazy, that place would see inside his soul, so he should keep it together. He added that otherwise, the abyss would destroy his spirit, and you understood that. Lisa seemed to be thinking, and Vulcan told her he knew that she was thinking about what they were doing there. Then, he asked Lisa how she was holding up, since she had come that far into the nether. Lisa didn't answer, and Vulcan added that he was sure Lisa couldn't help but remember what happened in the past. However, for Lisa, looking back was no use, and she was just looking forward now, but she wouldn't lie, because she was still afraid of Dr. Giovanni, but she knew the time would come when she would get over the doctor. Vulcan said he would be there when that time came, and they would tear him to pieces. According to Lisa, the Whiteclads were preparing for another great cataclysm, and she thought they had no time before it happened, and they needed to get stronger if they were going to stop them. Vulcan said they needed Arthur for that, and that was the reason why they were in the nether. On the other hand, Arthur and you found a goblin's nest, and the boy was terrified because a pack of giant rats was coming toward them. However, Vulcan couldn't understand how Arthur's wild delusions could be more productive than specialized training, and what their powers were, and what Adala was. Then, in the next scene, Vulcan asked Arthur what the point of all this was, because he's what brought them there. Lisa asked if they could still get out, and Vulcan replied that mazes were just like circuit boards, so he would remember the way out. However, Arthur stopped them, saying there was something deeper in. Vulcan wondered what it was, and Arthur said that when he was a child, his parents disappeared because they said they were leaving to save the world, and he was sure their adventure was like that too. Lisa said they had been there for an hour, and Vulcan said they should just go along with it until Arthur was satisfied. He said there were bound to be many metals there, and they just needed to find something to call orichalcum, and he could swap it out for the alloy he had prepared. However, if they continued going along with Arthur's trip, they would go deeper into the nether, and that was dangerous. Lisa said she knew that, so they should whip out the final boss and call it a day. On the other hand, Arthur seemed to see something that shocked him, and those were tentacles made of fire. They were telling him to leave, saying that was the ruler of the abyss, and Arthur wouldn't get the orichalcum that lay ahead. However, Arthur noticed it was Lisa, so he told her to be an adult because she was being a bad example for you. Lisa said Arthur was more perceptive than she expected, and she had embarrassed herself. Vulcan also told her to stop making things worse because it would just ruin the fun of the adventure. She replied that they had been there for an hour, and she was tired because it had made her into an overgrown child. You said Lisa had lost Arthur, and Lisa became furious, saying she would kill Arthur. She called him a stupid son of a bitch, saying he had brought them to hell, and she would show him who was boss. Vulcan was trying to calm Lisa down, and Arthur gave her a mean look, so he asked what was going on there. That suddenly made him serious. Arthur replied that he sensed something, and you said Arthur should stop because they were in the nether, while Vulcan asked if he was serious. Lisa was quiet, and Arthur told them to stand back because he could sense two people coming toward them. Vulcan said this wasn't good because Arthur didn't have Excalibur, but Arthur replied that a knight wouldn't be swayed by that, and his parents were out there, saving the world. He added that he would repel the enemies using the knightly martial arts Avalon stance. The whole place darkened, so Arthur became alarmed and asked who was there. The two people Arthur sensed coming were his parents, which shocked him, and Vulcan too. The three were very surprised that they encountered Arthur's parents, and Arthur asked why they were there of all places. His father replied asking if they hadn't told him why, and Vulcan still couldn't believe it. Then, they showed again the letter Arthur's parents wrote before they left, and Arthur seemed to understand why they were there, while Vulcan still couldn't understand what was happening, and Arthur's father said that was the reason why they were there. They were saving the world, and Lisa asked if Vulcan had planned this too, who replied asking how could he possibly plan that. Because of Arthur mentioning that those two people were saving the world, Vulcan finally realized they were Arthur's parents, who said he expected no less from his mother and father, and they were bringing honor to the names King and Queen. His mother said she recognized the uniforms they were wearing and realized Arthur was a fire soldier. His father then called him "Oh blessed son" because he was fighting to save the world. Arthur said that since his parents left, he had become the Night King, and it was difficult to be both a Night King and a fire soldier. Then, Mr. Boyle mentioned the words "Oh blessed son" one again, and before he could finish, Vulcan said don't tell him they were like Arthur, and Arthur's parents said in unison how splendid their son had become. Arthur replied that he was a knight, while Vulcan seemed to have a headache because it was like there were three Arthurs, and he wasn't ready for that. Then, he asked Arthur's parents if they could fill him in on what was happening, because he didn't understand what was going on. Arthur said Vulcan shouldn't think, but feel, but Vulcan got angry and told Arthur he needed less feeling and more thinking. According to Mr. Boyle, his intuition told him that Arthur's companions were his fire soldier comrades. Vulcan asked if he was sure it was his intuition and not their jumpsuits that Mrs. Boyle mentioned a while ago, and he also said they were all part of Company 8 like Arthur. However, Mr. Boyle had a serious look on his face, and the couple said together that they were the resistance, and they were undoing the corruption that had taken root in that country. Vulcan seemed not to know about the resistance, so he asked what the two meant. Mrs. Boyle replied that to simplify, they had debts they didn't want to pay, so her husband thought of a wild story, and she was just going along with it. You was surprised by this and asked her to repeat what she said. She said that basically, they were playing make-believe resistance in the nether, so you asked how many years they had been doing this, and why she would go along with something so idiotic. Mrs. Boyle said she couldn't let her husband go to the nether alone, because it was dangerous, and Arthur was still a child then, so she couldn't bring him along, and though her husband was a kook, she loved him. Lisa seemed unable to accept that they just left Arthur alone, and Mrs. Boyle replied that she could always have more children, but she only had one husband. And Arthur agreed with this, saying it was such wisdom, befitting his mother. Mr. Boyle said everything they did was to avoid calamity, and according to his wife, the Holy Soul Temple and the worship of the Sun God were created to control people, and an extra-dimensional being known as the Evangelist wanted to cause the second great cataclysm and destroy their world. Lisa was surprised by this, so she asked Mrs. Boyle how she knew this, and she added that spontaneous human combustion was caused by their different versions from hell, which were impeding their world, making Vulcan look very shocked. He asked where they had heard all this, and Mrs. Boyle said she got it from her husband, because he could come up with the wildest stories. Vulcan then asked Mr. Boyle how he knew all this, but he replied that he couldn't give him an easy how, and he was taking something out of his coat, saying he was a prophet, while putting on his hat. He then told the story about the time their restaurant went bankrupt that buried them in debt. So he thought about how they could get through, and he realized he had no choice but to lower his hat and avoid reality. The young Arthur asked him why he was looking inside his hat and what he was seeing. He said that from that point on, he would dip down his hat and look inside it whenever he lost his way, and eventually, he saw all the fields of heaven in there. He said when he looked at the stars and planets inside his hat, he understood of their truth. In the next scene, Arthur was sleeping, so he didn't know that his parents were saying goodbye to him, and the two had left. Then, we returned to the present, and Mr. Boyle explained what he was seeing inside his hat, and the danger facing their small celestial body, which was why they went to the Nether, and they were saving the world. Lisa called out to Vulcan, saying Mr. Boyle was crazy and his story was cracked, and he didn't want to listen. But before he could finish, Mr. Boyle said that the civilizations and ideologies of their world were just made up by the evangelist. According to Vulcan, all of this was too convenient and sketchy, so he thought it might be a trap. Then, he asked Mr. Boyle if he had also prophesied that they would show up there, and he replied that he sensed Arthur would come there. He said he felt Arthur would go down there, looking for something, and Arthur said his father was right, because he was looking for the orichalcum to make the true Excalibur. His father told him to follow, and you said Mr. Boyle was taking advantage of this, while Vulcan said they shouldn't think, just feel. Lisa said Vulcan was too trusting, asking if he remembered how easily she had tricked him. Vulcan replied asking if Lisa wasn't with them now, and Lisa said that was true. On the other hand, you asked if those two they met were Arthur's real parents. Arthur answered of course they were his real parents, because trickery was worthless against him, and his eyes couldn't be fooled. You said it was an exciting reunion, and according to Arthur, they were both working to save the world, so it wasn't a surprise they met again. You said that although Arthur was an idiot, he had his own way of looking at things. Then, Mr. Boyle said they were close, and in the next scene, he led them to a room full of all kinds of items. Lisa asked what was in that junk heap, and you said it was like Vulcan's workshop all over again, and what a nightmare it was. Arthur asked him if he had said the word night, but you replied that it wasn't that kind of night. On the other hand, Mrs. Boyle said the things piled up there were technology from before the Great Cataclysm, and they had collected them. Vulcan looked amazed at them, and he said he hadn't seen some of them yet, asking if that was some kind of device on the table. Then, Mr. Boyle found what he was going to give to Arthur, which looked like a large metal cone. Arthur asked what it was, and you asked if it was some sort of part. Mr. Boyle thought it was something good, and asked what Vulcan thought, and he seemed unable to believe it was a fairing from a spaceship. Mr. Boyle said Vulcan knew his stuff, and asked if he could hold that fairing. Vulcan said that object was covered in a special heat-resistant aluminum alloy, and it could take temperatures upwards of 2,000 to 3,000 degrees Celsius without signs of warping, so it was crazy resilient. Arthur thought it was dark matter, a star fragment, and it was suitable for a holy blade. You wanted to correct him because that wasn't what Vulcan said, and it was part of a rocket, but Lisa stopped him and told him to let Arthur be, who was grinning with joy at what he said. Then, Mr. Boyle spoke to 3 children saying they were back, and you was very surprised, asking who they were. Mrs. Boyle asked if they had been good, and the children replied yes. You still couldn't believe it because of the children, and Mr. Boyle said they had made the 3 while they were in the Nether, but you was stuttering from shock. Lisa told him to stop, because how the Boyle family ran their family was their own business. However, You argued that Lisa should think about Arthur, asking why they would have children when Mrs. Boyle had said she didn't want to bring a child to the Nether, which was the reason they left Arthur. So why would they do that to Arthur? He added that Arthur was lucky he wasn't listening, and Vulcan told Arthur that the metal would make a better sword compared to the fake orichalcum he had made up. So you told him not to tell Arthur that, because they were supposed to be pretending, and Vulcan would ruin it. However, Arthur said that was great news, which surprised you, because Arthur was only listening to what he wanted to hear. He also asked what was with this family, and suddenly became terrified and hysterical about everything. According to Lisa, they had spent a long time going there, but it seemed they just needed to go back and make the Excalibur, while Vulcan was delighted, and he said together with Arthur that the time had come to make the Excalibur. In the next scene, we move to the white-clad base, where Yona was praising Haumea for her work. However, Haumea was rude to him and told him to be quiet, because she said she didn't need his praise, as she already knew it. Yona said the pie decoding era had arrived, and the time for gathering the pillars was approaching, but Haumea gave no response. Then, the scene returned to Vulcan, who was beginning to forge Excalibur. Captain Obi was thanking Conroe for the sudden permission to use the forge and other things. Conroe asked if it was for Arthur's new sword, and if Vulcan would be making it. Obi replied yes, and that Arthur was strange, but if they could lift his spirits, he thought they could make him stronger. On the other hand, Vulcan continued forging Excalibur, and he said this was exactly what he expected, because the forge wasn't hot enough to melt the fairing, so they would use thermite to supplement it. The old man helping him said he could do it, while he was drinking water, and according to him, he suddenly felt tired for some reason, and Lisa asked where Arthur's family went. Arthur said this was the first time his family had come to the surface, so they were touring Asakusa, and you mentioned that the Boyles were running free again. Then, Vulcan said they were ready, and they would just pour the metal into the mold, and Arthur wanted to see it. Vulcan showed it to them, making all three gape in surprise, while Lisa said she knew it would be sick, and you said Arthur would finally have a rocket sword. Arthur got too close to the liquid metal Vulcan was pouring, so you pulled him back, telling him that third generation or not, if he got too close, he would get burned. According to Vulcan, they would lose the initial strength of the aluminum alloy, but making a sword from a rocket is like something right out of a story, and Lisa said hard work pays off. Arthur was delighted at that moment, so Lisa mentioned that she had never seen Arthur so happy. Then, he raised his hand and told the blade that he was its master. You and Vulcan smiled because of this, while Lisa was laughing out loud. In the next scene, Vulcan was resting, and Obi praised him, giving him soda for what he did. He replied that was exactly what he needed, so he drank the soda the captain gave. The captain said Vulcan looked tired because he heard he had encountered many irregularities, and according to Vulcan, that was Arthur, so there was really nothing regular about him. However, he said, he had held something incredible, and it was even better than what he planned to use in the beginning. Obi asked if Arthur gave him a tough time, and he replied no, and he was happy because it was like having a stupid younger brother. Obi said that was good because they needed Arthur to become strong, just like they needed Vulcan's tech, who said that although Arthur was an idiot, he wouldn't betray their expectations and would show his power. Then, he asked if they would fight again soon, and Obi replied yes, and they had no time to take it easy. He had heard from Captain Hibana that Sister Samire had become a pillar and the cause behind spontaneous human combustion. He said the evangelist was planning the second cataclysm, and the end of their plan was near, so they needed to prepare because the decisive battle was coming. Vulcan finished his soda and said break time was over because when the fight begins, all he could do was watch from the sidelines. Then, he went back to work, and he was very serious about it. You was delighted that the sheath was almost done, and Lisa mentioned that Vulcan had even made a belt to hold it. Vulcan said it was the home stretch, and he just continued what he was doing. In the next scene, you called Arthur, telling him to hurry up. He pointed to where he should go, and Arthur's face was almost expressionless. Vulcan greeted him, thanking him for waiting, and said he had finished making Excalibur. We were shown that beautiful sword, leaning against the wall, while Arthur still had no expression on his face. He inspected the weapon Vulcan had made, and while caressing it, he was about to say what he thought of it, but suddenly Vulcan handed him something. He asked what it was, and Vulcan replied that he had made it from what was left of the star fragment, and it was a stellar ring. He said Arthur should hang it around his neck, and when the time came, he should wear it. Arthur still wasn't saying anything, and he seemed deep in thought. Then, he thanked Vulcan and swore by his new blade that he would never be defeated again by anyone. Vulcan told the Night King not to disappoint them. In the next scene, Arthur returned to where his family was staying, and he found a letter from his father saying goodbye again. Because as happy as they were to return to the surface after such a long time, they were on a journey again. This shocked Arthur, and Maki arrived saying she had heard that Arthur had found his parents, and she was happy about that. However, she was surprised when she learned that they had left Arthur again, so she checked on him. She was suddenly surprised when she saw his face, because for her, it was impossible to imagine being abandoned by parents twice. But when she saw Arthur's face, she saw that he was the Night King, who would take the Holy Blade and save their star.